All right, welcome everyone to the Arborist call, May 6th. The agenda is somewhat standard with kind of a general discussion period where we cover different topics each time we meet. Just a kind of a welcome and intro to the meeting for those that might not be familiar with Arborist calls. We do research and implementation status updates as needed. That would be like updates on ZBD, updates on Zcash, or just anything related to those two projects that anyone would like to provide an update on. Then discussions vary again from meeting to meeting. This week our plan is to kind of just do a general update on NU5 progress, the things we've been working on. There was discussion in the R&D Discord about something, for lack of a better name, Arborist working sessions, essentially where we do collaboration across engineering teams for shared code, implementations, et cetera, and how we might make that work for everyone's benefit. And then one item that came up for discussion that folks were interested in, it was kind of a carryover from last time, was pool deprecation planning. We didn't cover it last time. Nate was unable to be with us. I'm not sure if he's going to be in on this call today or not, but that's kind of a Nate item. I know he's been doing some work on that. So if he's with us, by the time we get there, he can kind of give us an update on that. And we'll go from there. So, and then just kind of wrap up open announcements. But it's a super open call. So at any point in time, anyone has anything to talk about or clarify, or they want to interject, just feel free to. I try to watch the participants for raised hands, but just feel free to chime in and help out. So I'll try to keep an eye on the chat as best I can. Yeah, it's DC. DC just kind of updated Nate's status in the chat. I think you're right, DC. So had a couple meetings that he couldn't make over the last few days as well. So. All right, moving forward. Arborist calls, again, for folks that may not be familiar with them. It's essentially where protocol developers get together to talk about upgrade timelines, protocol features, what's going on in R&D. At sometimes the design of things, implementation specifics, new features, identify blockers, concerns, etc. And the goal is just to make protocol development more accessible and more transparent to the community at large, so everyone knows what's going on and has the opportunity to participate on whatever part they might want to jump in on. And anyone can participate in protocol development, of course, but also these calls. If anyone would like to suggest a topic to be presented, or would like to present something themselves as it relates to protocol development, you can just reach out to me directly through email or to the R&D Discord as well. So. All right, first item up was just kind of a general discussion of NU5, and again, we do these really open formats. So if anyone has any questions or wants clarification around anything, or has other suggestions about what to talk about or drill into, just let me know. Darrow's updated zips.z.cash to reflect the zips for NU5. Here's the total list of everything touched. Some of these obviously are net new for NU5, like Orchard, version 5 transaction format. Some have been updated to reflect changes in NU5 as well, and the complete list is up there. And unified addresses is zip 316, so that's been included in the list as well. General timeline update. This is pretty much the kind of the graphic we've been using. I've got it updated with some more specifics around the audits. We have Kedit officially signed up now to do an audit for us focused on cryptography. Their specification audit is underway. They got started last week after the ZK Proof Workshop, which they put on. That's underway. We're looking to do the implementation. Fortunately, NCC had some flexibility about when they could do that, Kedit as well. So we're looking to do the implementation audits for both, kind of roughly the second half of June, tentative at this point, which is kind of coincides with when we would have the testnet Zcash D release that we call it the support release for testnet. It's the release that sets testnet activation height right in there, which means that the implementation would largely be finished. So what they would be auditing would be a finished implementation beyond what we might find during testnet or feedback in the audits themselves. So So that's kind of the main update, was just formally including Kedit on here, and updated the timeline to kind of reflect when the implementation audits would be. But other than that, everything is kind of the same schedule. Sean couldn't be with us today, but he did provide an update in the R&D Discord about the work with Mary Mahler, the scientific review. There's been a couple of back and forth iterations, as Sean indicated in Discord, not significant from any findings, or mostly typos, clarifications, etc. But we're on kind of the third round of revision, which we think will be the last one. And Sean's hopeful that we can get the security proof published in the Halo book later this week. So that's kind of the goal there. Yeah. So anyway, okay, all right, very good. So any questions in general? This is kind of the same thing we've had up there for a few times.
I'm going to, so I mentioned in the Zips channel, I believe, in the R&D Discord, that there was some 225 and 244 related issues that I was uncovering while implementing the test vectors. So Chris and I had a chat about that, I think it was yesterday.
Yep, I have a PR for those changes that I just went over with Dara, so I'll be submitting that shortly.
Yeah, but just wanted to summarize the piece that needed adjustment was basically that the way in which so ZIP225 is just a transaction format for V5, and ZIP244 is the TXID hashing mechanism, the non-malleable hashing, and the signature hashing. And what was spotted while I was trying to implement these test vectors was that there was a in the case where you didn't have like orchard data or sapling data, the ZIP225 format just omits that data to make the transactions small. You just define that the vectors have a size of 0, and then that's all. Value balances were specified in there to be defined as having a default value of 0, but there wasn't anything specifying what happens for the anchors. In the case of sapling, it didn't matter because the anchors are still stored within the descriptions, but for orchard, it gets stored as metadata in the bundle next to them. And similarly for the binding signature and so on. So the, well, binding signature is metadata, it's the flags is the other one, that's right. Mm-hmm. So we had discussion about this, and the resolution we came to was that when there are no orchard actions, or when there are no sapling spends or outputs, the relevant root of that subtree should just be the empty hash. Mm-hmm. Rather than what the current spec indicates would happen is you have the TXID root, then within that you have transparent sprout, transparent sapling, orchard, whatever, and then those roots would be the empty ones normally, because inside them they have inside them they have like the compact version, the memo version, the non-compact bindings, and those internally loop over the amount, over the number of arrays. So at the moment, those would be empty hashes because when there's no data. But then there's also the extra metadata that was being committed to that we didn't have default values for. So instead of trying to define default values, what we're going to do is go to the root of that and just say we commit to there being no orchard actions, or we commit to there being no sapling spends and outputs. Mm-hmm. And that resolves that problem. And there's no issue with like the value balance, because there's an explicit consensus rule for that. Like already for sapling, if there are no spends and outputs and value balance is non-zero in the in-memory format, then that's returned as an error. But given the V5 transaction format doesn't even include it, and parsers will default to 0, it'll all be fine. So that's the main change. That obviously changes the semantics of it, but it fixes that edge case. So there's a change to that, and I believe it's also we're fixing a typo in one of the personalizations that it referred to orchard output instead of orchard action. So while we're making that change, we'll just fix that up.
Okay. Yeah, while we're on sort of minor spec changes, do you want me to just share the changes to the spec?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will screen.
You want to? Okay, let me unshare, and then you can you can take it away, Dara. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Right. Let me.
the find the right window. I guess I can just full screen that and then I can share the desktop.
That's brave when those notifications start coming in.
Yep.
Okay, so can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so basically there was a mistake in how we derive these fields of a note here. So it was correct in the Orchard book, but it wasn't correct in the spec. So fix that. I think I've already mentioned that one. There was a very minor pedantic error in theorem 543 because the case where Sinsemia hash to point returns bottom is covered by theorem 5.44, not 543. So just noting that. And then where the spec is now delegating completely to zip 316 for unified payment addresses. And also I had some updates to cover unified viewing keys. The diversifier indices for Orchard should be chosen uniquely. So there's a pseudo-random permutation between the diversifier index and the diversifier itself. The index is it's basically derived from the zip32 index. It is the zip32 index. And so you don't choose those randomly because that would defeat the point of using that PRP. You would get collisions. Okay, and then these are all too minor to mention, really. And that's it.
Thank you.
All right, very good. All right, let me get the screen back up. So any question, anything about menu 5 before we move on? I'll just keep the screen down. Nope, not at the moment.
I think I kind of mentioned this, I think, last time, but I think at some point, it's not urgent. I think we should have a chat, bit of a brainstorm, kind of an open chat about how Zcash is specified and whether we ever want to merge zips once they're finalized into the spec, so there's a single specification, or whether it's better to keep things separate. Because I was, we were kind of chatting about this, and I was saying, it'd be great if there was like a single document that you could print off, hand to a suitably qualified, team of engineers, and they could then just go and write from purely that spec.
Yeah, the problem is that the spec is 200 pages already.
Well, it'll be as long as it needs to be, sort of thing, in that scenario.
Which unfortunately is not long enough.
It's getting too unwieldy to edit. That's the problem. So it does actually help me to do my job to have the zips separate.
Or maybe we split into sections.
Otherwise, everything will be bottlenecked through me. I mean, I should try and get more people to edit the spec, but that hasn't happened so far. So realistically, having more things in zips is a way to parallelize the specification process.
And we're also,
like I said, I don't have the discussion now, but I think it is something we should talk about, and talk about different ideas, because I think there's it's something that's kind of been obviously highlighted to us during this whole process of like, where do things actually live? We can't,
Yeah, I accept it's quite difficult to remember where things live. tried to link to the zips from the spec.
That's what I was about to ask. In most cases, there's well, just like that one update you put in there for zip 316, right? It kind of links out to the zip at the right point in the spec.
Yeah, what you want to avoid really is having too much duplication between the protocol spec and the zips, because that doesn't help anyone. It's very difficult to keep them in sync if that happens.
We don't have to talk about this now, but what Stephen said, basically the spec could be the top level node or the root. It points out, it does not specify everything, but it does point to everything that you would need. Everything that needs to be in the spec can be in the spec, but anything that you could break out because it's too large or it's too bespoke or something like that. Like I could see a section. Or
it's not consensus.
Exactly. Like something that's like pointer to the Zcash network peer-to-peer protocol. Go this way.
Yeah, like what we actually have in the protocol spec, because it's the thing that we did, was all the shielded stacks. Yeah. So everything else on top of that's been a bit ancillary. So it actually probably wouldn't be too hard to like pull out, section 7, which is all the changes to Bitcoin transaction formats and things, and like start moving those into different documents, and keep what is currently largely just the crypto protocol as a single unit.
Big chunks of the appendices could be separate somewhere else.
Oh yeah, the Appendix A should be a separate document, really.
Right. Anyway, yeah.
Anyway, let's move on.
All right. Okay. All right. If nothing else, then I'll get my screen back up. We'll keep moving.
Oh, and thank you for all the work on the test vectors in the Hackworks repo. Those are just rolling in now. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so Yingtang has done a lot of work on that, and Stroud as well. So they should get credit as well.
It is useful work as we see we get the spec from it.
All right. Again, for lack of a better term, Arborist working sessions. But the discussion comes up from Discord, where we were talking about code sharing, and I believe Dara had noticed kind of an implementation issue around Sensimilla and raised that, and then that kind of got everyone thinking, oh, maybe that would be a great candidate for a module that's shared or code that's shared versus re-implemented in both cases. In the case of ZebraD, in the case of Zcash, and then eventually in the case of some other node, perhaps. But at any rate, just to kind of frame the conversation, and then people are welcome to chime in. Just balance code sharing where it makes sense, but still maintain independent implementation. So you don't code share to the point you have one node, and you try to do it where like individual team cadences are not impacted. So you wouldn't want to get on the hook like, team A has to have something delivered by the end of next sprint, or team B is blocked, that kind of thing. That would be too much pressure. And then just identify the type. Maybe the discussion today can be on the types of candidates for collaboration. Is it like implementation of Sensimilla hash, for example, or other things similar, from a category perspective? And then just like we do with Arborist calls, they're open to everyone. It would be, we could throw a meeting and call planning, let everyone know, tweet it out, whatever we need to do, just so that anyone's welcome to join, even if they just want to listen to people talk about code, So, but anyone have any thoughts on that? Anything we might be able to kind of work on together and share, collaborate on?
I think we need to be clear about the purpose of those calls, that they are focused on developers working on the fine details of implementing shared code, because I think there's a risk that they end up becoming a very broad discussion of decisions that have already been made, when we really do need to reserve some time to work on actually implementing code.
We don't want more meetings
totally
just for the sake of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what the Arborist call is. This calls for is to kind of that higher level, summarize this, talk about that, back and forth, discuss things. And these would literally be, Taylor, just, just like you said, hey, today we're going to be hacking on this, kind of session. Like it's just kind of like a transparent pairing, so to speak. So Dodger, your hand's up.
I was actually just gonna say the pairing thing, but you just said it. I think actually Jack Grigg was before me. Strap was before.
Oh, okay. All right. Go ahead.
I was going to say the same thing. Like this could quite easily just be, we have an R&D Discord. It supports video. We could literally just make these a time where we hop into a video channel instead of a text channel and just work on bits.
So is it better to have these as ad hoc when we actually need to work on a specific thing, or schedule?
I think it'll be useful, like something I quite like that actually Chris does on Fridays, which at ECC we do Fun Fridays, where we sort of are able to modulo necessary work like NU5 stuff at the moment. We can sort of put a bit more focus on other things if we want to that we think are useful. And so I think, Chris, you actually run open sessions where you just have like a slot that's just there and you're around doing things and other people can jump in. I feel like something like that might be useful for this, where it's just like we have a session where like, someone from ECC commits to being around there each week and someone from ZF commits or whatever. And then it's just a locus where like, maybe we're just doing our own thing, or maybe we're hacking on something together and then, use that as a locus for other people to just see sort of what grows from that perhaps. So keep it low key, but like at least have people who will be around.
Yeah, I found that that Friday open pairing to be really useful. I've ended up doing a lot of stuff for that's wallet related because the wallet team members frequently drop into that pairing, and then we work on stuff that's relevant to wallet concerns. So, but I can also just drop the link to that meet into one of the dev channels whenever that's going on, because that's a fairly regular thing.
So should we call this Arborist open pairing?
Yep.
So what would be in scope?
That's actually what I want to sort of cover more in this meeting, which is like it's good to have a venue for it, but I think the more pertinent question is what is it that how are we actually planning on collaborating? And I particularly want to hear ZF's sort of perspective on what they see as, given that the Zebra implementation started as, well, we have a bunch of Rust code from Zcash D. What if we can just use that to kick off a pure Rust implementation by doing the other bits in Rust? And that's obviously not quite how it's panned out. You did re-implement quite a bit of Sapling, for instance, yourselves, rather than directly using the main code that Zcash D was relying on. So I'd like to hear a bit about how you found that. And sort of what your perspective is on the things that you would like to see as common dependencies.
So big ones, Bellman, Halo 2, like big ones. Like we are probably those are the most unlikely for us to re-implement, just period. They're very bespoke. You need very deep knowledge to grok those libraries and the proof systems in general, and re-implementing them is both a little bit of why, and also it would be a lot of work to do that. So Halo 2,
maybe presumably also the second implementations?
Not sure about that yet.
Okay.
Probably,
right.
But not sure about that yet. Jub is a nice small library. Paulus, the pasta curves, not as small, still kind of small. What's that?
It's 2 curves instead of 1. So.
Exactly. That is a library that I could see implementing fresh if they wanted to. It would not be a lot of work. Whether you would, why you would, whatever, blah. And then kind of in the middle is like the stuff that's in your orchard crate So for example, Synsomia, very similar to the Pedersen hashes and commitments. For me, it was very easy to take pasta curves and just look at the spec as it was written at the time and just be like, yeah, this is very similar. And just like, boom, 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 bunch of functions, very aligned with the spec so that you could understand what it was doing. And then it's just a matter of making sure that you're consistent with the test vectors from Hackworks or whatever. That's not too bad. The circuit stuff, and then like,
but can I
not
jump in
including Poseidon, not including Poseidon.
so can I jump in, because ensuring that it matches the test vectors isn't necessarily enough, because there are corner cases, and it's infeasible to find test vectors that cover all of the corner cases. In fact, if you could do that, you would find a discrete log relation. So you would, it's cryptographically infeasible to find.
Okay, well, ensuring compatibility as much as we can. It's not a lot of code for Synsomia. It's generally like, it's one file for us, and then the pasta curves. Whereas the orchard circuits, the action circuits and stuff like that, that's more complicated. But for us, we don't have to worry about constructing a proof yet. We just have to take the ones that are on the chain and verify them. We will have to do that by the end of the year. So yeah, like there are some things that we share that we both depend on, that it's like that it is not worth the work to try to do that fresh. Halo 2. The Synsomia, some other, maybe re-implementation of a curve if we wanted to, maybe. Not that much work, generally narrow in scope, pretty easy to understand. If we just want to go ahead and do it, sure. And then there's the licensing. Halo 2, pasta curves, and Orchard Crate will have any contributions under the time boxed licensing, and has a different license and stuff like that. So there was some stuff where it was just like, oh, I'm just gonna go write it. Oh yeah, and then there's a weird license. Do I want to contribute my code to that and have it do the time box thing? I don't want to deal with it. I'll go over here and write it. But then there's some stuff where it's just infeasible, like Halo 2. So I'm going to use that as a dependency. So, the Hackworks, Jub, things, Bellman, we were able to contribute code for batch verification, a couple little things in Jub with, I think it was MIT Apache license, no problem. But the BOSO license just kind of adds a little friction there. So there's that.
So take my framing as I take from there is that either your main decision on whether to re-implement something is the amount of work necessary, and whether it's simple or streamlined enough to be able to manage as your own piece, rather than needing to share the if it's got more complexity to it, you want to share the logic there. Is sort of where your main boundary is. Okay,
very, yeah.
Yeah. In broad strokes, obviously case by case basis, but
yeah, broadly, like if it's not too risky, if it's generally succinct, if we can just do it and we don't have have much concerns or doubt about how well it's understood, like we can do it. We don't have to worry about doing a collaboration dance, or please review my PR, or I have a fork, I need to wait until it's merged, or and all this stuff, or anything related to Rust traits that like, oh, if we have it in our crate, we can just implement anything we want and we don't have to worry about the orphan rule or any of that stuff. All of that kind of goes out the window if it's a thing we don't mind implementing and owning it and all that stuff. But then there's a bar you pass where you're just like Halo 2, like it's just not, like all of the wins if we just implemented ourselves are just like completely outweighed by the risks and the burden if we were to try to implement Halo 2 independently. It's just, maybe someday, but like that day is not today.
And there's also a wrinkle here. there's a wrinkle here which has to do with the circuit implementations. So I'm not sure how feasible it is to do an independent implementation of a circuit and get it to be consensus compatible, because the proving and verification keys effectively are dependent on the order of constraints. It's not just dependent on the high level specification. So you can re-implement an equivalent circuit and it won't be compatible.
Oh, the order, we would maintain the order. It would basically
Right,
be like,
but you would basically have to completely follow the structure of our code. So
to the point that effectively, to the point that it's effectively a direct copy paste. Like like you could technically, like, we're trying to build things with gadgets, you know, build abstractions to make it easier to review the code and reason about it. But you would end up either building the exact same gadgets, i.e. copy paste, or inlining the gadgets and just doing what they do under the hood, but directly, which just makes the code harder to maintain. So yeah, and related to that is you can have the circuit logic in that way, but then there's also the type system interactions with the stuff outside the circuit, because obviously, like, the circuit stuff is not built in isolation. You still have to provide it with inputs, and those inputs are not. It's not too hard, I think, to do conversions between them, but like obviously, like the orchard crate will be primarily geared to, you know, orchard types in the orchard crate, and moving those into the circuit, because at least from my perspective, like the way I see the orchard crate is it would be an implementation of the orchard protocol as a standalone unit, in the same way that like Red Jub is an implementation of Red Jub signatures, or, you know, an X255.9 crate is an implementation of X255.9, and the
Orchard's bigger, if maybe not more complex than X509, but it's definitely a lot of more moving parts.
Yes, which is the question then of like getting the interaction of those is duplicating the engineering effort on two implementations worth it versus having more eyes on the single one is sort of where I'm looking at this and going, at the level of complexity that the orchard protocol ends up being, as you say, versus an individual component like Sinsemia.
I mean, so the trade-offs of multiple implementations versus the difficulty of consensus compatibility are different between circuits and non-circuit code.
Yeah.
I think the balance tips towards sort of reusing a single code base for circuits, to be honest.
So the way that I saw the rest of our year going is basically we finish NU5 validation, we depend on Halo 2 crate to verify, we depend indirectly on pasta curves, we retype them as we've needed to, and so on and so on. Then for Zebra Client, for our wallet, to just get it working, we would depend on your orchard crate to create transactions, to create proofs, to construct the circuit.
Okay.
And then we could see if we wanted to try to do this novel thing of implement a independent but in like completely compatible implementation of the circuit. But that was the way I saw it going for the rest of the year. But you are right. You're right, Dara, that the parts that are not the circuit that's basically what we've implemented. Keys, notes, commitments, all of that. That's everything that we've been implementing.
There's some entanglement though between the circuit code and that code. So when we generate witnesses, we'll be generating them using the elliptic curve types from the orchard crate and from pasta curves.
Right. And
there's no problem with wrapping those types, but you just need to be aware that the orchard will use them.
Yeah.
And one thing that strikes me, listening to this, is that maybe we need to think about, and again, this is not a short-term thing, but maybe we need to think about ways of specifying circuits in a way that they can be, recreated.
Like a DSL?
So compiling from a high-level languages it would help a lot. We just don't have the infrastructure to do that yet, but
that's a novel,
it's important,
influx field of research too.
Yeah, there's quite a few of those out there.
And the other thing I would say is that, yeah, absolutely in the short term, we're going to be looking at we're going to be using things like the orchard crates and the Halo 2 and whatnot. But in the longer term, the likelihood of us looking to re-implement them is significantly impacted by the license that is attached to those crates. So we are MIT Apache. In ZIP 1014, there is a recommendation that anything that's funded by the Dev Fund is licensed under MIT, and those Halo 2, Orchard, I think the Past the Curves are not, and that is an issue.
I mean, as Stephen knows, I'm on record as saying that we should probably just change the license to MIT. So that's my position.
It would make upstream contributing batch verification of Halo 2 and Red Palace signatures easier, or at least one less stumbling block to doing that.
And to go back to the original topic of which sections we should be collaborating on, we would have to think very, very carefully before we would have our engineers collaborate on crates and code that is licensed in that way. Mm-hmm. And I think you like, obviously you guys, we at the time announced this license back last year, and there was a fair amount of feedback and discussion about it, and you said you were going to take on board that feedback, but we haven't yet seen any changes. So the ball very much is in ECC's court on this matter.
Yeah,
there have been changes.
Go ahead.
Stephen's trying to get in.
No, I was just going to say, let's keep chatting about the license, but first I want to, Strad's had his hand up for a while. I think it's talking about code sharing, so let's talk about that. And then Addie has a really good question in the chat. Let's cover those two, and then we'll resume talking about licensing. So I can provide a little bit of context on that.
Yeah. So putting aside the license relevant ones, there's still questions of like the Red Jub Jub crate, which is a Zebra developed one. And like at the moment, what we're doing in the Orchard crate is I've got a fork of the Red Jub Jub crate that generalizes it to Red DSA, following the way that the Red DSA was designed in the protocol spec. And it's not being clear yet whether that's something that ZF actually wants to do. Like, it's like, it would be nice, but like there's some issues with it. And it's like, I don't have a clear view of like, is there something you want to commit to doing, or do you want to commit to keeping that as a separate implementation? And so it's figuring out questions like those, and at what level at which we so that there's no confusion about where we do spend our energy trying to collaborate it, rather than one side trying to do some collaboration and then it's sort of like communication mismatching and falling down. Because obviously like at the high level consensus level, like it doesn't, my personal view on this is it doesn't really matter which specific dependencies you use under the hood, because at the top level, like the user's specific choice is on which full node you use. And there's only going to be so much of a space for so many different full node implementations based on the value they offer to their users. But at the end of the day, like that's the level at which you're implementing the full set of consensus rules. You're making the decisions on what dependencies to use, whatever. And like, to me, it's like, oh yeah, you could depend on a common dependency to begin with, and then if there were some disagreement or some problem, well then you can switch that out or fork it or whatever at that point. But I don't see the specific like below the level of actually implementing the top level consensus rules. I don't really see much of an impediment to sharing code. Where I would see the benefit of re-implementation is specifically to do with fleshing out problems in the spec, like we've been doing with the test vectors, which are another re-implementation in another language, and so on. as I said in the R&D Discord, were Zebra using Golang for this, we wouldn't be having this discussion because using Rust from Go is terrible. And that's partly why, from what I recall from discussion, Zebra was done in Rust, is because like you could then you could use that common base rather than having to re-implement proving systems from scratch. Like there's definitely room for redoing things, and there's definitely room for like iterating on making sense on things, but like it would be good to have clarity of expectations on how each side wants to collaborate on these and where that line is.
Yeah, otherwise we just end up doing work that isn't going to be used.
Right.
Doesn't help anyone.
So Addie had a question in the chat, and Addie, you're welcome to ask it, or I can just read it out. But it was about kind of collaborating in general, and question about the Zcash and Zebra timelines. Are they in sync as the work toward NU5 is underway? I think Deirdre just kind of touched on that, like the plan for the year. First, kind of verify the chain when NU5 activates. But obviously the capabilities of the nodes intersect at some point, right? And then would it be easier to collaborate then when those implementations are, just kind of in sync, if you will? So it's a good question. Does it change fundamentally the opportunities to collaborate, or is it still kind of the same? It's the same thing, same set of considerations, perhaps.
So if we're already at a baseline, so if we're in sync, if the nodes are in sync and they have equal functionality and they have their own user base or whatever, and then we're looking at a new feature comes in that we're proposing to implement. In my mind, that makes it easier in that you have a defined feature. You don't have the engineering teams don't have like moving targets on things that on their own from that perspective. So it becomes easier to go, okay, like we can schedule time to collaborate on a on a core implementation, common implementation if we wanted to. So I think the answer is yes, it would be easier because the scheduling would be more predictable, and you could figure out that interaction sort of up front rather than having, like at the moment, we have ECC has all these implementations sort of in place and Zebra's playing catch up. And so you have multiple things that you're trying to put your engineering time onto in addition to this.
But also we could be involved in the planning of the feature itself and the specification of the feature itself before code starts rolling out or whatever. Or TLDR, we can be involved in the specification of a feature and also decide based on that if a collaborative implementation that we would both depend on is what we want to do for that feature, or if it's sufficiently, if it would be fine or good or easier or whatever, or better to do independent implementations on your own time or whatever. In the case for some of the Orchard stuff, the Orchard spec was still coming down in mid-March. Orchard code in the Orchard crates started getting written and stuff like that. And we were kind of stuck because we were fundamentally downstream of the spec and the ECC for how do you implement the thing at all. And then, it was sort of like, oh, we shall implement the Orchard crate and you can just use that. And we're just like, oh, maybe. We kind of didn't have a choice either way. We were waiting on the spec, and then you were like, well, you can just use the Orchard crate. And you're like, oh, okay. Like we would like the choice in the future.
Well, I think that choice becomes easier when you have a production node, right? When you've got a complete node, right? Then those are maybe the type of opportunities Strad was talking about. It might be easier to collaborate on certain things.
Well, on any feature, you need to have a specification of the feature before you can decide whether to do one piece of code to implement the feature or multiple pieces of code.
Well, whether you've got a production, the stage of Zebra's maturity doesn't affect that. It's the way in which it's being, like writing code and then writing the spec does not lend itself to then being able to look at a spec and go, oh yeah, we want to collaborate on this, or collaborate on the implementation, or okay, we don't, it's better to go separate.
I mean,
it means that if you're writing the code and the spec at the same time, then there is no opportunity to do that.
Yeah. At the same time, we don't really want to box ourselves into a waterfall development process. Like where I would eventually like to see us is like, spec features and, when they're smaller than Orchard. Sort of at the stage we're discussing them and finalizing the specs, there is already at least a base implementation done. So that would be a single implementation. And then I guess the decision at that point would be, do we build on that implementation and productionize it, or do we write a separate one?
It also influences is influenced by the NUP, like how much time you have.
Maybe a place to start with this is actually on the question of some of the features that we've discussed for the NU6 timeline. So ZSAs would be an excellent thing to start this kind of discussion on early. A longer
You'll need
term.
to explain that acronym because it's changed in the last week.
Oh, well,
Zcash fielded assets.
You mean what we're referring to as UDAs?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the acronym changed quite a while ago, but people like myself
It changed
lax
from,
and keep calling it UDAs.
It changed
Or
from
we could go all the way
UDA
back
to
and call it
UIT,
user issued tokens.
Or colored coins, but that's not the same thing, right? So I remember I was reading your original write-up, Dodgers. So I think it was called something about colored coins. So
it was my write-up, but yeah.
okay, all right, all right.
What I was going to say before was that Sapling and Orchard are really exceptional in terms of features or upgrades, because they basically have to be designed as a unit. You're designing a complete new circuit and cryptographic protocol, and it's possible to do that collaboratively between two organizations, but it's extremely difficult.
Well, I think there's a difference between designing it and then implementing it, and then the process by which it gets integrated into the protocol. So there are three different things. You design something, you implement it, and then you add it to the protocol. And in the past, adding it to the protocol was straightforward because there was only one node game in town. But going forward, there's going to be two, and then the question just becomes, well, to what extent, do we want to make sure that it's possible for the second node to be able to do an independent implementation of such things?
We certainly want it to be possible.
Yeah.
So Eddie has
and
a
we
follow.
want it to be easier than it is now.
Yeah, for sure. Eddie has a follow-up question. Is there an NU5 testnet release plan for Zebra, following which the need to stay in sync with the spec will be accelerated?
Oh yeah, we're aiming for
Yep.
testnet validation at same time as everyone else, which is just Zcash.
Okay.
But it is worth
I
probably
guess I might qualify.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I'll let Tior say this.
Oh, sorry. I was about to say, qualify that by saying in Zebra, because nobody is spending money with Zebra yet or relying on its outputs, we have a bit of leeway that we won't have for future network upgrades.
Yeah.
So in future network upgrades, when we do the release, we will need to be exactly in sync with verification. Right now, we can afford to leave a few things a little bit later, but yes, that won't be an option for future network upgrades.
Good point. Yep. Okay. All right. Anything else on open pairings or collaboration in general before we move on to chat about licensing? Any other points or questions?
I think my impression is that the Zcash and Zebra teams have been starting kind of from the opposite ends of NU5. I think the Zebra team was able to start work on version 5 transactions and a lot of the higher level Orchard data structures fairly early on, because those were the things that were spec'd out. And those were the things that we had the relevant expertise in developing, and I think my impression is that the Zcash team has been focusing on, or at least merging the Halo 2 and the Orchard side of things. So we were working at it from different ends. And I think Addy is right in saying that if we were in sync a bit more and had planned things together, it might have been easier for us to collaborate on some things.
Right. I actually did have one question. You mentioned a Zebra client, which is essentially a wallet. I'm as I understand it, is there interest in collaboration on a, kind of an independent node level wallet that could be
It'll be
used by
separate from the
Zcash
node.
D or ZebraD?
Actually,
That's Zec
The-
wallet, right?
well, Zec wallet uses Zcash D under the covers. I meant like replacing that whole Bitcoin wallet, basically. So
the Zebra client design is going to be a separate process, and it will talk. The idea is that it will talk to ZebraD, which is within your trust boundary, and you register. You register your viewing keys with it, so you do your child decryptions, and then you query it, and all the minting of all of your stuff, of your new transactions, and the creation of the proofs will happen in the separate process, and it will communicate over a channel. Don't see a reason why you couldn't do something similar with a different node and have that communicate with a different node. But
okay. Strad, you had a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to Taylor's point of like the direction that things are sort of going from. I thought it might be useful if I just briefly share my screen. So
I need about 5 minutes. 5 minutes on licensing before we wrap up. So.
Yeah, I will literally take 30 seconds, but part of our direction on things is influenced by
nice, yeah.
Which is the DAG that I've been keeping and maintaining to sort of figuring out the order in which things need to happen in order to get things done and unblock. So that's sort of that I haven't yet figured out a way to get, but I'd like to get maybe GitHub Actions CI to sort of bring this up potentially at some point. I just haven't had the time to do that, but like this is sort of the guiding thing we're working on for all the bold boxes are just things that are not blocked by anything else. So here's down here all the recursion pieces, for instance, that we're obviously not working on at the moment because Orchard doesn't need them. But yeah, so when you say like we've been going from the inside out, that's basically because of this, where all the types build on each other, and so we're mostly working from left to right on this graph.
I've diagrammed.
But this is not the same thing as this is not the same thing as bottom up, because there are cases in which you can follow the dependencies top down. I can't immediately see anything there, but
yeah, there are a few, but
it does tend to rely to end up with a mostly bottom up structure.
Yeah.
Marshall, I think it's seconds. Marshall asked, yeah, okay, there you go. Like how long does it take to generate? Yeah.
It took me a while, so I can stop sharing now. I can't see where the stop button is. Help.
should be down toward the.
It's the red thing, which is an
there we go.
on the.
Yeah, there you go.
Found it.
There we go. Yeah, it does run in seconds now, right, Strad? You optimized
it originally took like 10 minutes, and then I learned how to use GraphQL, and now it's 8 seconds.
Right. All right, very good. Okay. Let's see.
We have a similar plan, but it's sitting in our Zen Hub instance, and it's probably nowhere near as nice. But yeah, we do have a similar set of dependencies.
Yeah, this is extracted from the Zen Hub, blocked and blocking. Yes. So actually, I can probably give you the script.
There's a collaboration opportunity for you right there.
We'll tell Pili, our project manager, she will be amazed and very happy.
It's nice, and the boxes are like clickable. Like you can click on a box.
It's an SVG. You can just click on the boxes and go to the issues.
Yeah, go to the issue in GitHub. So it's pretty cool.
Right, I can move my hands. Exactly. You can go on licensing now.
Yep. Okay. Absolutely. All right. Great. So next steps on that before I move on, like we just want to like create an open pairing session and announce it in the call thing and just kind of whoever shows up works on whatever topic
Yeah,
comes up. Do we want to
yeah, we
suggest
can,
things to work on, or how do we want to do that?
let's
Next
just
step.
pick off async in the R&D Discord. We'll
Okay, let's do that. Okay.
Figure out a time, and then we can just start turning up and see what happens.
Yep. Okay. So we can do a deeper dive on licensing. Zuko should be at the next call, I'm sure. But I mean I can give you the update on progress. The Basel Bootstrap open source license is just kind of a renaming of TGPPL. There has been one modification, and it had to do with when a derivative work had to open source their code over the original TGPPL. So as written, the TGPPL 1.0, you had up to 12 months to open source your code. And in that 12-month transitive period, you could license it however you wanted. Now you have to open source your derived work. Day one, you still have the 12-month window to license your derived work however you'd like, and then eventually open source under Basel. So that's one minor thing that kind of went in. At the same time, we renamed it for the most part. The short version is Zuko's already committed to making it, not an issue for ZBRD to leverage anything licensed under Basel, and that's still the intent. I'm working with him on that with our IP attorney to kind of come up with the cleanest, simplest way to do that. That's unambiguous in its interpretation. So. That's kind of the update.
I have a
there.
suggestion for the simplest way, which is to switch
Well,
to MIT.
I know what your suggestion is, yeah.
Yeah,
But anyway,
I would agree.
so I mean, yeah. So that's that's kind of the update. We've got a blog post on TGPPL. I believe it was actually renamed, introducing Basel since we renamed the license, but it's under one of the two. I mean, the overall goal of Basel as it applies to open source in general, forget Zcash for a moment, is to accomplish two things. One is to prevent value capture from some either proprietary company or other open source project grabbing your code, getting all the benefit of it and kind of not contributing back. And again, this is just generic attributes of Basel. And the second one is to make open source sustainable in some fashion, right? So it allows for an open source project, a derivative work to be created, and then if someone wanted to charge a fee to use that derivative work for 12 months and then ultimately open source under Basel, that's kind of what's built into the license itself. That's kind of an alternate to like what Uniswap's doing with the Uniswap v3 license. It's an alternate to what MetaMask is doing with some of their new licensing. It's an attempt to solve kind of the same problem, meaning that it was stated pretty well in the Uniswap v3 license. Starkware is another example of that as well. But in the Uniswap v3 announcement, they kind of said, we're working really hard on Uniswap, and we feel like our ecosystem and our partners should be the first to benefit from the great work we're doing. As Basel applies to Zcash, we kind of feel the same thing. Like Basel developed code should benefit, or sorry, ECC developed code under Basel should benefit the Zcash project, the ecosystem, and its partners before everyone else. We're funded by the ZEC holders, as is the foundation, as is major grants. And the work that we do under that funding should benefit first and foremost, Zcash, our partner. The Basel as it applies to Zcash kind of thought process. But again, zooming back out, the commitment is there to make it seamless to be consumed by the foundation, or for that matter, any other node developer that spun up a node that wanted to pull in some of the Halo components, or Orchard components, or whatever you like to call it.
I think what is probably being underestimated is the friction that's introduced by a highly unusual license. I know you reference it as a TGPPL,
Yeah.
but let's face it, only one project has really used TGPPL, and that was Zuko's previous company.
And that project had tons of license exceptions to allow it to be used to interoperate with other licenses.
And just the very fact that we had to go and talk to our lawyers about this introduces expense, introduces friction, and other projects who are potentially looking at working with Zcash or whatever may well look at it and go, you know what, I can't be bothered going and spending thousands of dollars with a lawyer to make sure that we're not going to end up with some viral issue, where, so, it's ECC's choice, but, it's a, do not in any way underestimate the fact that it's a significant issue, and it does, drastically increase the likelihood that we will be looking to re-implement functionality that is only available under Basel. And the community spoke in September 14. They said, it should be open sourced, preferably the MIT license.
Right.
And where stuff is under Apache MIT, then it makes life so much easier. But this extra friction, I think, has been massively underestimated. And there was a lot of discussion. There was a big long forum thread, a lot of questions that were asked, a lot of concerns raised that I don't think have ever really been answered. So it's up to you guys. The ball is very firmly in your court. Like, just be under no illusion about that. The ball is in ECC's court on this, and it really is up to you guys to decide how you want to be, how you want to, spend those funds that you're receiving from the dev fund, and how you want to contribute back, and whether you really want to make life easy or difficult for other participants in this ecosystem.
Yeah, I think the things we're working on right now to, in the case of like ZBRD, for example, are gonna, it's kind of it'll obviously be the first, in practice thing we've worked through, but I think that'll clarify a lot of things and how it works in practice. So
one thing that just occurred to me is that a more restrictive license with all the kind of stumbling blocks or friction that Dodger kind of described makes me a little more hesitant about having a single implementation, because more eyes and more hands on keyboards with less restriction to contributing bug fixes or saying, I think I found a vulnerability, or, yada, 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 makes me wary.
No, I think there's a lot of value in multiple implementations outside of licensing issues or licensing concerns. Yeah.
It having only Halo 2, if it were like MIT free as a bird, like, whatever, having a low barrier as possible to people contributing bug reports, security reports, patches, whatever, makes me less worried about having one implementation of this novel cryptography that we all depend on, versus like a stumbling block for someone who's like, oh, this thing, what's I don't know what a BOSA license is, and then they just don't, and we miss out on a good bug report or whatever.
I should note that the naming is really unfortunate, because when you go and do an internet search for Bootstrap open source license, you often get the Bootstrap license, which is a completely different license for the Bootstrap project. So I know you've just done a rename, but I just wanted to bring that up as another source of friction. It can actually be hard to get the correct license if you just type that in, because there is another, I think it's bootstrap.org, has a license for the Bootstrap.
The cascading style sheet framework thing, right? Probably, I'm guessing.
I don't have any context. I just knew it was the wrong license.
That's what I thought of. So probably.
Yeah.
So just also going back to, we were talking about collaborating on projects together. We'll just have to be really upfront about which license things are going to be under if we're going to collaborate on new code. It's a bit different if there's a bunch of existing code that's licensed under a specific license. But yeah, that'll just have to be one of our initial discussions, is what license will this shared code between Zebra and Zcash be in? Because I think up until, while we were perhaps working together on reusing the Zcash, what's it called? The Libra Zcash, it was all the same license as Zebra. And so as we consider reusing parts of that for Zebra, the license situation is quite simple. It's just about whether we want to write the glue code or write our own. But yeah, it becomes a bit more complicated for new work at least.
Yep, very good point. Okay.
Yeah, it is practically impossible to find the Vosel license unless you already know where to look.
Yeah, I don't know at this point that we would expect it to show up that much, since it's just been kind of renamed in a repo. Yeah. So
I'll just say it'd be a real shame if collaboration within the Zcash ecosystem was hampered by this. And it would be an even bigger shame if we ended up having to expend more resources and money from the dev fund on creating independent implementations on things because of this.
Right. I
That would
agree.
be a real shame. And I don't think that that's what the community intended to happen.
And that's not what we intend either, right? Like, I mean, the ECC didn't set out with the goal of how can we, hamstring the development in Zcash or spend more money than we have to on anything. So that's definitely not our intent, and I don't think that's going to happen at all. Like, we're not going to allow that to happen. That's kind of the opposite of the intent. So, just based on the conversations I've been in, I think it'll be everyone will be pretty happy with the solution we're coming up with.
Like, I'd love that if right now we were talking more about the protocol than about licenses.
Yeah.
So Dodger,
Yeah.
I hear you there, but I think what we're trying to mitigate here with this slightly more restrictive license is a situation in which the Zcash community funds a bunch of work that other projects then just pull in and create value for their ecosystem that never results in value flowing back to Zcash holders working on Zcash.
Yeah, that was a, and I won't call out any specific projects because this is obviously recorded and we put it out, but that was one of the things that this was meant to address, right? So is the opposite problem of what you're describing, Dodger. It is, we do this great hard work, somebody lifts the code, throws it in their project, and then immediately starts talking about how much better they are than Zcash.
But they can do that. They can do that with MIT, and we all stand on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah, they can.
How much Bitcoin code is in Zcash? We all stand on the shoulders of giants, and they can do that already anyway using what we have. They can do it using Basel. They can.
Well, they could do it using Basel if they relicense their whole code base under Basel, right? Yeah.
Well, not if they use it as a dependency.
They don't have to relicense.
They do have to relicense. Like I said, it's a copyleft license.
The ball's in your court. You said you were going to listen to feedback. It is. The feedback has been given. I think it's been heard, and it's real. But there are consequences to choices like this.
And we've been working on it. So.
We would just think it would be very, very unfortunate if we were forced to.
I agree. And
you should relicense because we are not relicensing most of our code, and most of our code is MIT. So if we can do it, then anyone else can do it. And it's a little bit more complicated because we hold the copyright, so we could work around it anyway. But I think we're only relying on the same terms of Basel that anyone else is relying on, which means that it must be possible to mix Basel and MIT code.
Yeah.
Like I say, if we can do it, then other people can do it. But what they can't do is they don't have the expertise that we have in-house. So
there's obviously benefits to holding the copyright of code. But if it's great if a single organization or entity or person holds the copyright, because then they can choose to relicense it however they want. If things change. With open source, one of the benefits of open source and open collaborative development is having multiple people contribute to a code base, in which case, unless they assign the copyright to a single entity, you then have a different issue, which is that in order to relicense it, you have to go and contact everybody and get their permissions. So
Right.
there's a you know, like I said, the issue here isn't, you know, we recognize and acknowledge that there is no GPL style virality here, that we're not going to, you know, infect Zebra with this new license. We know that because we've spoken to lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
There are plenty of other contributors and collaborators and potential, you know, members of the Zcash ecosystem who may not want to go to the time and effort and expenditure of talking to lawyers about this, and we run the risk of missing out on all of that collaboration. So anyway, I think we should draw a line under this.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
you know,
mm-hmm.
You know, it does feel like we're retreading, you know, stuff that was discussed last year as well.
Mm-hmm. All right, sounds good. Anyone have anything else they want to go over today before we wrap up? I think we're caught up in the chat. All right, well, everyone we'll catch up async about the open pairings in Discord. Everyone have a good fun Friday. I know some folks have some PTO coming up, so happy PTO. Safe travels for everyone that might be traveling.
I need
and we'll catch up. Dodger, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Just one thing I should have mentioned before. Watch out in the next in the coming week or so for some announcements about Zcon, which will be happening on June 8th and 9th, if my memory serves me correctly. It'll be embarrassing if I don't get that right.
It's I think you're right. It's right in there. The 7th is a Monday, so it's like middle of that week, I think. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And obviously there's, you know, we've got a whole bunch of in fact, I think 1, 2, 3. There's at least 3 team members from ECC who will be speaking or participating in panels on this call right now. So yeah, we're very much looking forward to.
We have to coordinate what we're talking about.
I know. Yeah,
we'll do it.
We do.
I swear we'll do.
Like that
We've only got a month.
I have a to-do to sync up with you, Deirdre, on that.
Yeah.
We're doing a joint thing, so that'll be fun. It's my first Zcon, by the way, so I'm super excited.
Cool.
It's a pity it's a remote one, because the in-person ones are fantastic.
I know. I've seen some pictures and heard about the locations, and yeah, I think boy, I'm totally going off in a tangent here, but I think it was supposed to be in Lima, Peru, right? Last year.
Right.
Wow,
yes,
that was.
It was.
We already had it. My wife's from Ecuador. So we had a big trip planned. We're going to Zcon, we're going to Machu Picchu, we're going down to Ecuador to visit family. So yeah, all that got canceled. So
well, maybe next year.
I know, right? Yeah, that'd be great. All right. Well, look, everyone, have a good weekend, and we'll catch up in Discord. So take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.